Welcome to Cultivated Live for Tuesday, May 7th, I'm told. I'm Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media and the host of this program, Cultivated Live. And since we launched, our goal at Cultivated has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you, the cannabis industry, with the most important, insightful, and useful information in a timely fashion. We do it in two key ways. One, through our daily newsletter at Cultivated Daily. Two, through this daily live stream at Cultivated Live, streaming across the world on LinkedIn and YouTube. We'd love if you followed us on LinkedIn, subscribe on YouTube, get our daily newsletter. All the links to how to do that are below. I'm joined on this Tuesday and all Tuesdays by Brad Spirrison, my dorm mate at Emory University circa 1992. Brad, welcome.
1992, 1993, decades in the making. Great to be here. Good morning to you.
Can you imagine? I'm just thinking about the technology that we have just to do this every week versus what we were doing, like our dorm room. You had a golf game where you like spun a thing. Do you remember this?
It was the best. That was on the Apple IIe.
Oh, you still have that? They're worth something.
I should. I definitely haven't thrown it out.
It's definitely somewhere. It's probably a storage unit in Metro Atlanta. Brad, we get together on Tuesdays to talk about the intersection of cannabis and politics for something we like to call United States of Cannabis, which more and more states every day. So the United States of Cannabis are getting bigger. There's a couple things, a couple retread issues that we keep talking about every week, but they keep coming back. You ready to jump into it?
I can't wait.
Yeah, so the first thing, we're going to go to Florida, which is, I think, the biggest state, not named Texas, still to not have legalized. Let's call it that way. That's a big introduction. But obviously, they have a ballot measure in November that needs 60% plus one vote, or I guess 60% to actually pass to legalize adult use recreational cannabis. Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, and I say Republican because it seems to be Republican governors are standing in the way of cannabis reform more than even Republicans in Congress. But he has gotten the Republican Party in the state of Florida to officially oppose cannabis and actually the abortion rights measure, which allows him to start raising money into the party to oppose cannabis. This actually does worry me. Not that he opposes it, but he's actually going to raise money to actively go against this measure. How worried are you about Florida?
I'm actually excited about Florida, and here's why. I think because of last week's historic rescheduling, it's not an announcement, but whatever it was, there's going to be a reallocation of resources on the part of cannabis companies. Cultivated reported and surmised, I think very insightfully, that Florida, if recreational, because of its population and because of the visitors, could be the largest cannabis market in the United States. That now, without 280E, could be extremely profitable, not just for Trulieve, but for also all the other MSOs that are operating down there that are investing. They're going to continue to fight on safe. They're going to continue to make sure that rescheduling gets over the finish line. But I think over the next 4 or 5 months, tell me, what is more vital than getting Florida to become rec? So I think it's going to be a huge battle, and I'm going to microwave my infused popcorn.
Yeah, it really is something. It's a big deal, obviously. And I was down there, as you know, last week in Florida. And I don't know if I told you this, but both exits to my parents' community where they live in South Florida, both exits, and it's a seniors community, both, they empty into dispensaries.
As well they should.
Yeah, and they do, and that's not uncommon. Although a lot of the dispensaries are like in old banks, right? Because so much real estate in Florida that's sort of underutilized. They're both in old banks, ready for drive-through recreational. What's that?
They already have the safe ready.
They already do have the safe. That's correct. Yeah. So, but again, this follows on Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin, who vetoed Virginia's bill last month for adult use recreational. But it also lends itself to the next story where we've been talking a lot, even though not a lot of people do, about New Hampshire, where we had a House bill, a bipartisan House bill pass to implement adult use in a pretty fair, like free market way in New Hampshire. That's in the House. The Senate, more aligned with the Republican Governor Chris Sununu, really wants much more of a top-down approach from the state, much like their alcohol sales. The governor this week said this: fundamentally, I don't love this idea anyway, so that's where he stands. I do believe it's inevitable, and I have a responsibility of setting us up for the best long-term system that we possibly can. So he's taking this is inevitable, let's just get the approach that I want, which is highly restrictive and state-owned. I don't know enough about New Hampshire politics. The House, when we talked to them, the two folks that wrote the bill and co-sponsored the bill, Erica Leon, the Republican House member who wrote the bill, and Democratic co-sponsor Anita Burrows, they seem skeptical they could get enough votes to actually pass some sort of compromise version. But this appears to be happening, I think, in New Hampshire, but maybe not. But the politics in New Hampshire, unlike anywhere else.
I'd keep an eye in this particular case on Pennsylvania as well, because Pennsylvania is like the only other Northeast state not to turn from medical to adult use. And their medical market, I believe, is also state run and administered similar to the way alcohol is. And if so, if they go rec that way, it might give a template or at least some air cover for New Hampshire to go that way as well. And the way I look at it, it doesn't seem like a good model. I mean, these are all with cannabis. The states can really truly be laboratories to try to find out which works and which doesn't, and none of them are perfect. So while I'm very skeptical over any kind of state-driven market, it's not like any other alternative has truly flourished.
Right, that's true. That's true. And actually, well, someone, the opposite end of the spectrum is Oklahoma, which also has its own challenges. But I think the one key point that rescheduling might change the conversation in New Hampshire, and probably in Pennsylvania too. When we first talked to the folks in New Hampshire, maybe 2 months ago, one of the key attributes that they were worried about was running afoul of the federal government. But if the federal government now is Schedule 3 on cannabis, that might take some arguments away from actually cannabis advocates to say that state run might actually work. I don't know enough about it, but that we said even before we got on air, we are not lawyers, but that may take one of the key arguments away from some of the bill's sponsors.
And then even more broadly, I mean, rescheduling obviously gives us 280E. It gives us greater research on the plant. But then that third bucket was also, quote unquote, normalization of cannabis. Within the normalization of cannabis, you now have tailwinds where headwinds usually existed on all these little battles.
Yeah.
And so at the very least, it's one additional thing to cite in favor of legalization and normalization. Now that the federal government, for the first time in 50 years, is really commenting about it, and this time in a very positive way.
And just a note, this is breaking news, Brad. Last time we had on the folks from New Hampshire, I was promised a New Hampshire Cannabis Association hockey jersey.
Yes.
I won't have it this week, but next week, not next week, the week after, I will have it, and I will wear it proudly on United States of Cannabis.
Well, I'm going to sit back and wait for those pancakes they have at there.
I know. I got to get the pancakes. We did talk to them offline about some pancake house in northern New Hampshire, which seems like it might be worth the drive, to be quite honest, the way they described it. So maybe we'll get there as well. Brad, there was a couple of quick things I saw yesterday that actually made it to our newsletter from, I don't even know, it's a website called Ask a Poll. It seems like someone stands in the bowels of Congress and asks people questions as they go by. This week's question was about where senators stood on safer banking and rescheduling. It provided some pretty choice quotes, and I think also highlights the Republicans' challenge with where they don't know as a caucus, the Republican Senate caucus, where they're actually going to come down on these things. We have Republican Senator Ron Johnson, who is like a conspiracy theorist. I think he probably would embrace that. It's not just me saying that. He said, if it's going to be legal, then I might as well let them use the banks. It just makes it worse if you can't use the bank. So he is against rescheduling, but for safer banking. Keep that in your mind for a sec, because Josh Hawley, a Republican senator, said he opposes safer banking, but he kind of is okay with rescheduling. So there's a lot going on there. We'll let them hash that out at a smoke-filled room.
Where it is a democracy.
What's that? Yeah, it is a democracy for sure. But the caucus usually is a little bit tighter than that. At least Mitch McConnell used to try to make it that way. But then we also have Raphael Warnock, for his part, a Democrat from Georgia, saying he supported rescheduling, obviously, he said for too long, the so-called war on drugs has been a war on Black and brown communities. That is for sure true. So I think we're seeing the conversation around rescheduling obviously getting planted on top of the Senate, but also this is, as Chuck Schumer said, going to be a priority. He said it months ago, but it does seem to be making its way to the halls of Congress, at least according to Ask a Poll, which now I'm a frequent visitor of because I think it's a cool website.
We're in the window again. There's an amplifier effect, halo effect, and I'm not sure how long it's going to last, or maybe this is only the beginning, or maybe this is just one great sugar high, and 3 months from now it's going to be back to whatever. But right now, in an election year, whether it's Joanne Caceres from Denton's or other folks, experts that we've had on the pod, telling us that, just around Memorial Day or maybe June is still the window to get some legislation across the board, and you never know.
Yeah.
Anything can happen.
Yeah, I love it. There's something else funny. This is not the only time that Pod Save America has actually come up. I do you remember maybe one of our first shows, we talked about Elizabeth Warren gave a wink. Giving a wink on a podcast is one thing, but she gave a wink about rescheduling. Like she didn't know anything, but she maybe did. But they put out a tweet. They were talking about, is President Biden reclassifying cannabis trying to energize young people to vote for Biden this fall? Their quote was this. Are you ready? Well, the answer is kind of like a weed gummy. Anytime President Biden does something good, it takes a long time to feel the political effects. Funny. It's funny, right?
It's true. And it's apt.
It's apt. It is apt. And I do think, though, the conversation that we've been having for weeks or months, that this is really somewhere months ago, the Democratic leadership and sort of all stripes of Democrats said this is going to be an issue in the campaign. We're going to make an issue. It's going to kick off on the State of the Union. It's going to carry through for several months. I don't know if they had insight to when rescheduling is going to happen, but they knew rescheduling was going to be a big pillar in this. They probably knew safer banking was going to be a pillar in this. And I think, I don't know if they knew at the time, but then Florida being a big part of this as well, which is actually quite a lot to have, quite a big impact on an election coming up in November. It really is smack dab of what we talk about every Tuesday.
Yeah. And I think from a political perspective, now that we see more pressure on the Biden administration or more evidence that it's going to be harder and harder to get the youth vote, given what we've seen on college campuses, he might be looking for any kind of accelerant, stimulant, anything. And so, we know what the president personally thinks about cannabis, but it might be his best friend and perhaps the nation's best friend going into 2024.
Yeah. And say what you will about Democrats, Republicans, whatever. Rescheduling is going to have happened under a Democratic president, the first real federal move in 50 years on it. I do believe safer banking is actually going to happen. Maybe I'm just super hopeful, but I think as rescheduling happens, there's less and less that stands in the way of banking reform, to be quite honest. So I think we launched this a few months ago, and it was very good timing, Brad.
It's prescient.
Prescient. I'm glad we didn't start it in 1993. The technology was not up for it at the time.
No. The CD-ROM was just getting fired up.
Well, we would have had to press play and record at the same time on the boombox. If anybody we're much older than most people that are in the cannabis industry, but if you didn't press play and record at the same time, you are not the same age as Brad and I.
Never. But
anything else catch your eye? What's happening on the landscape?
I enjoy the annual green market report where they talk about companies and their financial state. And this year, only one company, Green Thumb Industries out of Chicago, actually turned a profit. And it was somewhat of a modest profit, less than $50 million off over $1 billion in revenue. We're still seeing major losses on the part of all the MSOs, but if we take what the Air CEO said last week, was it something like $50 million in savings over the course of 280E? A lot of these losses are going to evaporate. And so when these losses evaporate, the cannabis companies are going to have more operating capital. So I very much look forward to seeing what the 2024 results come in at now that we're going to see cannabis companies start taking these deductions.
Yeah, I would say yes to that. And it's earnings week, really, in cannabis. We have tomorrow, Ascend, the 8th, Green Thumb, Verano, and Marimed, the 9th, Curaleaf, Trulieve, TerraSend, Cannabis, and Jushi. I think it's Jushi. So it's a big week there as well. But as you said, Air Wellness on our show, the CEO was talking about the $50 million back into their back to the bottom line. But I also think, and he was clear in this saying this too, what it means to them is one thing, but what it means to mom and pop operators, if you have 1, 3, 5, 10 shops, it's obviously it's a smaller dollar amount, but it can make a much bigger difference in your overall operation. So it is not important. It is a material difference for everybody in the industry. It'll be interesting to see when and how that gets sort of applied to the bottom line, or if there's mention of it even on these earnings calls, right? If not for 280, our earnings would have been X.
You go to emerging markets, whether it's Maryland, where you just were, or New Jersey, where I was last month for Unpacked, and the primary barrier to entry for any licensed operator is lack of capital. And now, when you look at your financial projections, you could show that much more revenue being retained as a result of 280E. One would think that, combined with a little bit more of an exciting atmosphere, could bring in capital in ways that otherwise weren't possible 1 week ago.
Yes, all of those things are true. Brad, as always, I like seeing your smiling face on Tuesday mornings. It's like Smith Hall in 1992.
Love it. I'm gonna jam some Indigo Girls.
No joke. That is what I was just listening to on my morning walk. They actually have a new song out, which I do like. So, Brad, as always, thank you for your time this morning. We will see you next Tuesday. Thank you, everybody, for joining this episode of Cultivated Live, or our United States of Cannabis segment. That's it for today. We encourage you to subscribe to our daily newsletter at cultivated.news. Follow us on LinkedIn. Smash the subscribe button on YouTube. For everybody in Maryland. It's the sky is falling in the Midwest. It's about to fall here too. We'll be back here tomorrow on Wednesday with Jeremy Burke. Maybe he is out with COVID, so we'll. Yes, it's still a thing. He's not feeling great. So Jeremy, shout out, feel better. We'll be back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, with or without Jeremy. Find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. And it's a great day, whether or not it's raining, to buy cannabis at your local dispensary. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah.